What if I told you we could rebuild coral reefs like we design cities using artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and real estate economics? And that doing so could protect our coastlines, restore marine biodiversity, and drive local economies all at once. Hey, everybody. I'm Steven Schauer, and welcome to Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. In today's episode, we're diving deep, literally and figuratively, into the cutting edge world of ocean restoration with my first ever return guest, Fritz Neumeyer. I had a wonderful conversation with Fritz a few months back and shared that in episodes 44 and 45. If you've heard our earlier conversation, you already know Fritz brings both visionary thinking and real world pragmatism to the climate conversation. Today, we go even further. This time, it's all about how we actually make the bold vision of Oceans 2050 real. You'll learn how coral reefs can be engineered like infrastructure, how quantum computing and AI are revolutionizing ecological modeling, and how turning habitat into investment-grade real estate could change everything we thought we knew about conservation funding. Fritz makes the case that saving the ocean isn't just a moral imperative, it's an economic necessity. And the good news, we already have all the tools we need to do it. So, for those of you who are just joining us, Fritz Neumeyer is the co-founder and CEO of Oceans 2050, where he's been shaping strategy and systems since the organization's inception. Professional architect with a master's degree from ETH Zurich, Fritz brings a rare blend of design thinking, science, and systems theory into his mission. He's not just building projects, he's building the very architecture of ocean restoration. And he's pioneering a suite of first-of-its-kind digital tools to help ocean communities thrive. So, if you've ever wondered how we go from abstract hope to concrete action, or how technology and storytelling can come together to save the planet, this is the episode for you. Let's jump into this fascinating conversation with Fritz Neumeyer here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. Fritz, welcome back to Stories Sustain Us. You're my first return guest. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, I talked too much. We didn't get through the program last time.
No, it was great. I had the first two episodes that ran a short time ago, and I'm excited to have you back as kind of for a part 3, and just for everybody listening or watching. After the first two episodes aired, Fritz and I, we stayed in touch, and you kind of wanted to go into greater detail, and I welcome that. I think what we've talked a little bit about since then is making sure that there's really detail, like granular concepts here, that your vision for returning the oceans to abundance in a generation isn't just flowery words on a website that inspire people and provide hope for folks, but there's actual details that we didn't quite touch on last time as we were sharing your vision. So let's kind of jump into it. We don't have to learn your history again. Let's just jump into the meat of it. Let's talk about some of those details. And I don't know, did I capture that correctly? I'll start first with that. Is that
yeah. No, just referencing our nice and long conversations before we start recording. I gave you this compliment about how pleasantly surprised I was about this, what for me, somewhat unusual format from my own experiences, where all of a sudden I'm seeing you talk about my personal story in a context of how I work and see things that I'd never really seen that way. So that's kind of interesting. But the what you're just mentioning is a really important point, like that's been brought to us from the outside. So it's not like I'm being a smarty pants here. But what's sort of a general pattern of concern in our environmental work is that a lot of big words are used, and especially because a lot of sort of we go back to the financing ideas of foundations and philanthropies and this general approach of nonprofit. Even if it's institutional, you're asking for money, right?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to sort of paint a very broad black and white stroke on one of the principal differences between the business world and the institutional and for-profit world, is in one you ask for money, and in the other one you sell stuff. Right? You create a value proposition and you you give someone something that they think is a good thing for them to execute on. And so there's a lot of loud words. There's a lot of promises going around. And we ourselves are cynical of a lot of these things. I like to call a lot of, I'm going to get in trouble for this, hopefully. No, not. I'm going to rephrase it. But, some of those sometimes spicy, these articles about when COP happens, right? The environmental summits. And then you see
Sure.
the bitey journalism about how many private jets came in. And while that's a little bit of sort of poignant, hyperbole, I'm not sure I'm using the word correctly. There's an element to that. We sometimes get cynical. We like to call these conferences the determined to be committed events, right? Because it's a lot of announcement about announcements and about announcements.
Right.
And
right.
so in parallel to that, like the danger that we all run into in our enthusiasm, and then the very justified criticism we often hear, especially like friendly fire from people that consult us, is that we want to make sure stuff doesn't come across as vaporware and we sound like people who are just idealists. And I think we did touch a couple of those threads on or especially like in the second episode about some of these chapters for the future,
right?
And how important and useful it is to embrace more of like business thinking, where you have to put out a convincing product. And so what we didn't talk about a lot is the actual details. So we had this surprisingly fun little chapter by my own history that I didn't expect, and I really appreciate. So, down to like, hey kids, this is how your father grew up. And we talked about sort of philosophical big picture stuff and like this idea of abundance. Oh, did you, you've read the book by now?
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
Well, those concepts were interestingly like sort of affirmative of things we spoke. We talked about sort of this ground in the middle and how do we get from a polarized world to the working ground. I think we talked a little bit about sort of our fortunate position as Oceans 2050 and this idea that we've been advocating for the restoration of abundance for now, because we can move into this world and saying, hey, which culture, which economy, right? No matter how you see the world or that blue thing, you get it both when the oceans are abundant. So we can kind of organically keep building on that part. But in order to fulfill, the questions of people who are going to, buy your stuff, you need to actually deliver not just concepts and ideas, but you need to show them how the machine's going to work.
Right.
And down to the detail, right? Like I gave you this funny analogy as from my history as an architect. If you're talking to a client, you'll start at the lofty goals and where does your family want to be and how is it supposed to feel, and like the sort of the more emotional value-based things, but you do drill down often in the first conversation because people have prepared onto how the toilet paper is going to be connected so that you don't have nasty surprises.
Right.
So it's important, it's important when we to back up this idea of there's hope and active hope, and there's like actual stuff coming with technology that can change the frameworks of how we think and what we can expect to be possible. It's important to follow up some of those claims with concrete examples of going down on questions. So what are you talking about? What kind of technology deliver, and like what does this actually look like, to make sure that there's confidence in these claims down to a granular and executable and kind of sort of a detailed precision level. So,
absolutely.
Well, let's
get into the pipes then of the blueprints, and since we did talk about some of the flowery emotional stuff, which to me is also incredibly important, you got to have that emotional connection to want to take action and do something. Otherwise, you're not going to. Facts and figures aren't going to move people into action. It's that emotional tie. So we got that emotional tie connected. We want to restore our oceans to abundance. That we got that taken care of in episodes 1 and 2. So let's get into the blueprint, the pipes of the blueprint, and there's funding aspects and economics we could tie in. There's AI and quantum issues that we touched on in the last episode. There's the restoration of coral reefs that I really want to dig into. You talked offline. We talked a little bit about some 3D printing and things that are going on that you're working on. So where do you want to start? Because I want to touch on all of these things. Do you want to start with the funding and economics? Do you want to start with AI and quantum computing, 3D printing? Where do you want to go? Yeah. So we're going
So
to
I
get
think
into
we can
all of it,
start.
but where do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So actually, now that you say that, something interesting comes to mind. I was just listening to Simon Sinek on a podcast again, and I
Yeah.
used to really appreciate his like foundational works, like the Start with Why, right?
Yeah.
But they're the
I'm
sequence.
a big fan of his.
Why
Yeah.
it's why, how, what, right? You start with the
Yep.
why, and you talk about the how, but you need to deliver the what in order for someone to really believe it. And
Absolutely.
so let's put it this way, right? If I want to sell you on this idea that we can rebuild our oceans and I want to get that sale done, right? So that's a nice big vision to sell. And we've talked a little bit about the how from a philosophical part, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe today we can focus a little bit on the what.
On the
That's
what?
a
Yeah.
short answer to what you spend 5 minutes on. So I think we can start with financing, but not just as a mechanism, but going back to this idea, where it relates to my story, of, hey, like, I think we touched on this as well, this concept that we had this maturity from carbon to blue carbon to then, blue natural capital.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I did mention that, sort of as a headline, iconic title of either a talk, I think it was a talk that Carlos and Ralph Shami have called, Blue Natural Capital is the New Real Estate, right? Which, is a theoretical approach to something, but when you translate it kind of gets us to those mechanics where if you look at real estate development, right?
Yeah.
It's really clear the stuff works because the numbers work. Right? We often talk about napkin economics. If you know what a unit's going to cost you and what it's going to give you as a sale or a lease, real estate kicks in. People know what to do, right? And that's an aspect we want to take into environmental restoration. Right? We want to look at it through that lens where it's not a case that has to be fundraised and patched together, but something that can drive itself in and out of itself, right? So I think we did touch on this aspect as well. It takes sort of a data approach, because for that you need to start numerifying and identifying like how ecosystems create returns and how you can connect them to specific values so you can get someone specific to pay up. But the general idea of it is, hey, if we think this from the other side, it looks different, right? We're still going to act out of idealism and kickstarting these efforts out of a nonprofit that wants to restore abundance is also kind of an organic approach to it. But we'll have more faith in the power if we run it on an inertly functioning business system. Right?
Yeah.
And that means we talked about this earlier, just heading up to the call a little bit. It's, I'll repeat it, right? So if we look at nature financing, you look at the two principal drivers, like one we're well familiar with, which is this carbon idea. But the carbon idea is a global thing, right? It means you do local something somewhere, right? And aside from your environmental footprint that you have on your region, we're going to look at the emissions you do that affect the world globally. And just a second. Yeah, so the way you get paid for environmental work, right, is basically under those two aspects. So you can either get paid by saying, hey, we're providing a local ecosystem service that has value. I'll get into some of those examples and specifics. And you can say, hey, we have this global currency called a ton of carbon, where actually what it is a ton of carbon dioxide sequestration, right? It just means like the stuff we pull out and burn, we're going to now get it back into the ground or somewhere
capture it one way or another, right?
Going to fix our atmosphere and our oceans from a chemical level, right? But there's no local benefit attached to this payment plan, right? And so far in the last 20 years, we've built up this whole idea that you can get paid for environmental restoration work through this global system, right? Which are the carbon markets,
right?
And we've not looked with a lot of or an equivalent focus on the other part, which is how can we create the local financing mechanisms, creating the returns, quantifying ecosystem services, and just sort of allocating them specifically and finding stakeholders that benefit from them specifically that can be called to the table to say, hey, we want to collect money to create these assets here that will then provide economically interesting services for you. And we'll look at them. They can be negative, they can be positive. I think we mentioned them in sort of generally. We can go back to those again in a second. So the carbon ton is sort of, maybe a good analogy is sort of the barrel of oil, right? Where sort of industry down to state budgets. Russia, the Saudis, their whole state budget is calculated on the presumption of a price of an oil barrel. I think it's usually around $100. That's why when you had those those early stage tariff hiccups and the prognoses for the oil barrel price went from 100 to 66. That's a big swing for a state budget.
Yeah.
And now we have to be a little bit cautious about what will happen to that. Right? We've built an entire industry of carbon trading, even impact investing. Many of the nascent and sort of practicing investment funds are built on this idea that the principal return will be created by either tons that companies offtake or by tons that you sell, tons of carbons that you sell on the market. And with the changes that we've seen in the last couple of months, especially now since the new administration is in place, that might get shaky, right? This idea of whatever it is, most of them they're only going to go up. The ton of carbon is going to go up, especially for nature-based solutions. So $50, whatever. That might look very different. It means that this whole business that we've built, might find a lot of air missing in its balloon to be figured.
And I think that business, and from my perspective, you may have a different thought on it. I think the carbon capture business already was a little shaky to begin with, in a sense that there's questions about verification. If someone's saying they're capturing X amount of carbon from the air, or protecting Y amount of Amazon forest from deforestation, which is essentially keeping that carbon already stored in the trees and in the ground. The verification process of those who are selling those credits is sometimes called into question as well. So I think the market itself, while very valuable, is going to be rocked, as you're talking about, with the new administration. But it was already on a little bit of shaky ground from my perspective, even though it's been around for a few decades, because of that verification aspect. Because there's so many stories out there of folks double selling credits, or they protected a forest that no longer exists, things of that nature. So the carbon market's important, but I think there's some challenges inherent in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And those have been very literal, right? Yep. I remember, what was it, 2 years ago, the entire German carbon market, let's call it business field, and it's one of those big, a lot of impact investors, impact investing setups were pushing for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Got a huge shakeup because of 2 news articles that basically said this whole idea about what Verra's doing here. So the principle of these certifiers.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of untrustworthy baloney, and a lot of this is just papers. Yeah, because there are some things in there that are really tricky, right? And so we'll go back to what you said as well, is that we can appreciate it for what it is. It's been 20 years in the making. Ralph always says, that's sort of that's just the characteristics of a nascent market. It has to stabilize.
Yeah,
but there are inherent problems with the product, right? And the extreme cases are, you can write a letter saying that I would like a carbon credit because of what I'm going to do. This forest that I have here is not going to get cut down, right? And that feels weird, right?
Yeah.
Even if there might be a grain to it. Anyway, it's a complicated and very sort of hard to see market, which is why it has all these troubles. It's been really difficult for companies to actually go in that. So interestingly, but we can tie a different piece to it, right? So
let's do that.
What we worked on a lot for a long time, and especially once blue carbon became kind of a luxury item in the carbon sphere, was so the way it was done is that we started with carbon, and then we would start talking about co-benefits, right? So the idea was that you would sell a ton of carbon, but you could get more for it on the market if it did other things, like go through whatever your kind of value is you'd like represented. Biodiversity was sort of the first second currency that now, did look like it was going to mature really well into its own kind of segment. And I always preferred that one because it's got more of a, hey, here's a kind of world we would like to have. While carbon offset is just sort of there's nothing to sell except non-negativity. It's not very exciting. Biodiversity, you can at least imagine birds. Right, there's some sort of, this is going to give a world that my grandchildren will enjoy more, but still, it's an abstract. I mean, we touched on this literacy issue, right? That for me, who's been in this now for 10 years, when I say a certain word, I actually see a lot of stuff on my inner eye. Like biodiversity for me means wetlands. For most people, it does something else, and for many people, it doesn't. It's still a very abstract term that I think is difficult to get excitement for.
Yep.
And it's got another interesting issue now, right? Which is has the word diversity in it, which is at the moment, not one of
True.
the
Yeah. It
not one
is.
of the
It
leading
is.
keywords you want to be selling at the moment. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Not in
so
the
we,
U.S. at least.
get to the
Yeah.
yeah, and the world still follows a lot of the U.S. leads, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's just to look at, and
Yeah.
we don't need to judge it here. I do think I've always
Yeah.
had
It's just that it is what it is right now.
never found it entirely convincing. But to keep spinning this thread, so we attach these local outcomes. Biodiversity again sounds like something global, but what actually is fish in a special, birds in a concrete place, right? It is a local.
Right.
It's actually
Very
a local
local.
outcome.
Yeah.
So we would use these local outcomes and attach them to the ton of carbon as co-benefits to get more on the carbon market, right? And so that's sort of where we were sticking the local part to the global currency that we were trying to sell. And what we're seeing now is almost like I would almost call it a role reversal here, where there's this MAGA acronym for Make America Green Again, right? That agenda is also in the new administration. And so it comes with that shift where like, hey, we want to see the local benefits, right? And then we can see if we can use like the ton of carbon to get some extra cash in for these projects on a global market, but it's going to be looked at from a local lens first, right? And be it what it may, what it does is it puts the ball closer to closer to real estate development and closer in my wheelhouse as an architect, where right, like we can start showing local benefits, and that means we can put them in a place, and if the leverage is right, we can use that to create energy for projects, right? And so
Absolutely. And
you're frozen for okay, good. So let's get that into some concrete examples, right? Because the two easiest ones, I'm not sure how much we touched on this on the last one, so sorry if there's redundancy here. The two easiest ones are coastal protection and abundant life, right? And you can see how like revenue streams are attached to that. So I just mentioned leverage. So let's take Florida, right? Where there's a ton of leverage in both ways, right? So you've got you've got Palm Beach, you've got Miami, Dade, like those counties where you probably have the most dense value of real estate on the coast in any place in the world. And so, if you don't have a reef that can break and attenuate your wave energy and maybe seagrasses and mangroves that will stop the floods from entering, you'll have a lot of damage on land when storm patterns change. And the more you have of them, the more damage there's going to be, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not
which they're already having, by the way. I mean, this is not a future, vision of climate change 20, 30, 40 years from now. I mean, I was in Fort Lauderdale last year for work and looking at some of their stormwater management and flood seawalls issues that they're already dealing with, because they have what they call sunny day flooding. The tides are already coming over the existing seawalls and flooding out neighborhoods on a beautiful day. So absolutely. This isn't an abstract climate change is going to, hurt Fort Lauderdale in 2100. It's damaging them now. So so I didn't want to stop your thread of thought there, but I just want to let the audience know this again. This isn't about future problems. This is about how do we solve existing problems and keep future problems from being worse. So please.
Yeah, and this one is really easy to communicate, right?
Yeah.
Because you can make this about abstract sort of economic values. What it is that everybody understands is this is an insurance issue of the greatest category, right? So very simple analogy coming off of more recent news. The fires of California are the floods of Florida, right? So the other thing you want to know is that whether or not you want scientific data out, whether or not you want to trust scientists in the climate sphere and their prognoses, which, I'm going to stay neutral here, but I can understand the case of some people who don't trust the neutrality of the data because of the inherent system that sort of doomsday scenarios get you more money, right? I'm not one of the people who believes that. I have, a lot of faith in a lot of our scientific fellows and their integrity. And there's some great work done on these flood modeling things that's sort of using, T's on quantum maybe, but like some of the modeling scenarios that are, Mike back in the University of San Diego. There's a lot of like good work being done on this stuff. But the other thing that's just really interesting is the best data is in Las Vegas and with the insurances, right? That's it,
Yeah.
right? Because that's how they make their money, and there's a lot of leverage on that. And so whether you call it climate change or not, it's just talk to the insurance guy, and they're telling you right now these patterns are telling us this, and that means risk exposure X, and that means price. It
Right.
means price increase, and it means even worse. I think we touched this too. Like if you look at insurance as a red band, right? If the 2 or 3 of the last storms that were harder and out of line in calendar, they shift the prediction model for this entire band, and it means everybody who is insured will have to pay more, but it also means other people will drop out.
Right.
Right? So it's not an issue just for the super rich in their super mansions and the high leverage condos. This is a risk for everyone who's trying to insure their home in one of these areas. And so, right, this is all a lot of negativity. So this is damage prevention, but damage
Right.
prevention is a massive financial lever, right? So if we can come in and say, hey, we can plan and build reefs like infrastructure assets that will, reduce these flood patterns, right? That's a way to finance this. You can either go bond it with the community, you can go in with the insurance and create a bond, or you can literally start finding investment where you say, okay, well, if we get the insurance to say, even if we build it, they're going to reduce the insurance premiums, then you can finance the gap, right? All of a
Right.
sudden, we're in real estate logic in a very kind of clean way.
Yeah, I love that.
And a lot of great people can do that really, really well, right? You just need to start putting those cases together. It needs a lot of modeling, it needs a lot of data, and it needs a couple of jumps of faith because of the fact that some of this modeling is still built on predictions we don't, we will have to affirm over the years, but we also know how much smarter AI and quantum capacities make us in terms of predicting things like the weather and storm damages, right?
Yeah.
So insurances use these kind of things. So if we work with them to use it, right, that's one way to create financial leverage to build these projects like real estate projects. So the more romantic piece is the positive one, where we'll go back to Florida again. We touched it, right? Was it 14, 15 largest economy in the world? And as our friends tell us, without being able to verify this, the revenue for the state of Florida from recreational fishing is about 14 billion a year, right? Recreational fishing, reminder again, that's not people who go out to sell fish on the market, and it's not people who have to catch dinner. That's
Right.
people who like to be out on a boat and drink beer and smoke cigars and catch fish, right? Like they've done with their fathers, who their fathers did that with their grandfathers, right? And
Yeah.
so that's an economic and cultural identity. And so, debated or not, science or not, people down there in the Keys and before they know that their fish are going down, right? And we also we know that when you build habitat, you get the fish back. A lot of systemic other issues to address. I'm not going to omit these, climate change, warming waters, chemistry issues, like all of this stuff needs to be incorporated there.
Right.
But the general idea is going back to building, Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson's, like, let's build more of what we want, and then we'll have abundance for both sides.
Right.
And not do it about the housing sector, but let's take the parallel. If you build fish homes and crab homes and urchin homes and protections, right, you're going to get more of it. And interestingly enough, I think we did touch this on the coral reef, was sort of one example where you can see them together. Interestingly, those two things, the negative and the positive, are produced by the same ecosystem if it's done right.
Right.
And so
Right.
right now we're looking at financing, restoration through damage avoidance or through fishery abundance. We're interestingly not putting all those threads together, because then all the other stuff comes on top. Water quality issues, cultural things, diving tourism, whatever it is. So they kind of layer on. So the more we get better at being able to track the complexity of these stacked values, the more we'll be able to create funding to actually build them. Right?
Yeah.
So good news is there's already funding there on massive scales. We're talking infrastructure scales here, from the smart people down there in the Keys, for example, because they know if their fish are gone, they lose their economies and they lose their culture, right? And so, us being able to connect those dots is going to allow us to fund more. And maybe this is one of those things where we can start talking a little bit about technology, right?
Yeah.
Just like in real estate, what this requires is almost like, how do you sell a real estate project, right? It needs to be planned really, really well with all the numbers that you need, right? Like good predictions on how much square footage is going to be produced. What's it going to cost? What's the value of that square footage? Like, what's it if you sell it? What's it if you buy? If you lease it? If you rent it out? Okay, then if you rent it out, what's the facility going to cost you over the next 20 years? Like, how do these numbers work? and how reliable is the prediction and the technology underlying these predictions. Right now in real estate, we know that because we've been building for hundreds of thousands, whatever years.
Yeah.
From the birds to us, like we're very comfortable with it. And so, back to my seat as an architect, like I'm used to that. That's how I used to sell my work. And so what we're doing now is bringing more of that into this world, right? Which has so far been scientifically dominated. Many projects are run by nonprofits, right? Nonprofits are usually populated by former marine scientists, administrators, all sorts of beautiful, great jobs. But what they're almost never populated by is architects and real estate developers.
Yeah. Economists.
Economists.
Right.
I mean, some of these guys are very economically smart, but that kind of thinking is not prevalent. So going back to technology, what we're doing now is building all those tool sets out that we would use in a development project on land. Like when you want to plan an intervention like this, you build a digital twin for it before, right? Where you can see every piece of geometry. That's the thing that will drive the building process, right? And you go somewhere, you can go scan the oceans now, so you have a proper 3D footprint of what's going on there. You can take an acoustic footprint to see how much life is there, and you can LiDAR scan, whatever you want. You can take EDNA analysis, so you can get a baseline that will allow you to say, hey, this is the before, and after we came, we had all this. You had fishery increase. Other things is great example, great story, by the way. And so we're still thinking a lot of these things on a theoretical level. We've got to do this, like trying to figure out how to map these kind of different patterns together so we can show people that the value streams are connected. And then I think I mentioned in episode 2, like our great guy we work with in, sort of fishing Republican.
Yeah.
For Florida. He's like, yeah, well, why don't we just, put something on the buoy that counts how many boats come by? And you're like, oh, yeah.
It's like a trail counter.
That's it. Yeah, it's like, but if you count the boats, all of a sudden it's like, that's one of the base metrics of tourism. Thank you. We didn't think of that. Yeah. But that's the great part of living, working with these people who actually know what that sort of looks like in real life and what are the relevant numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so the good news about that is that about this whole thing, let's say, is the good news and the bad news, right? The bad news is that for environmental restoration, we're using tools that are just hopelessly outdated if we compare them to what we do in the professional world. So the good news, that's the bad news. The good news about that is that it means it gives us a huge innovation gap that we can exploit now, right? We'll be able to get a lot better, a lot faster, and our sort of, we're convinced that this is going to give us a really fun road when we introduce these kind of tools to this work, right? Like proper visualization, exciting stuff, videos of how life comes back, a real virtual twin of what you're going to build, infrastructure type, kind of looking at reefscapes almost like a city quarter, like an urban development thing where everything's planned out, right? Down to from crab homes to fish homes. And we'll get to production technology in a second, but other building analogies, like you've got a virtual thing that is a precursor to the real thing. In the environmental space, we can use that to fundraise and crowdsource and do all sorts of fun things. But so then your model drives your building, and then it becomes your digital twin, virtual twin that you use for facility management. Right? Yeah. So all these things are they're just in line, haven't connected those dots. So that'll be fun. And we're really confident that once we introduce this kind of stuff, there are going to be a lot of smart people who see the value in this and are going to jump on that train. So I think the speed of change you'll see in the industry will be quick. And specifically with what you said, sort of, this is, when you jumped in earlier, this is an economic reality, right? And so the great news is we don't have to have ideological discussions for the people on the ground who know what's happening. They know the storm damages are getting bigger.
Right.
They know the fish are getting less. They know their corals are dying, right? And they know what that stuff means to them. Right. So we'll be able to work with those guys better. And the other thing, and we talked about this ad nauseum last time, this sort of transition we need to do on our side to detrust a little bit that the processes are going to fix things, but and focus on outcomes again. It's going to be so much easier to work with these guys to actually manage in the future because they're going to know very well, like, what sort of the interest of the reef demands from all stakeholders down the road.
Right.
Because now they know, like, what it looks like to kind of face the barrel of, when we lose this stuff, we're going to lose a
the collapse is coming, right? Well, let me let me kind of just make sure and recapture what I think you've just shared, because you share a lot of information there that I'm excited about. I don't know if I'm one of those smart people that are getting amped up about what you just shared, but I'm excited about it nevertheless. But before we get into kind of the construction part of it, the details of how do we actually do rebuild some of these reefs, some of the things that I'm excited about hearing, certainly this incorporating economics into habitat value. I think that is almost like the search for the Holy Grail.
It is.
It is such a thing that needs to happen, and I'm excited to hear about the progress that you're making and the circles that you're in, the progress that's being made with the smart scientists and computer scientists that you're collaborating with and aware of. Because I just going back to my experience in riverine restoration work, for example, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is involved in a lot of these projects, at least historically, because of the waters of the U.S. here. Whether it's a river system or a coastal system, you're going to likely have to engage the Army Corps of Engineers. That might be shifting under the world we're transitioning into now. But historically, the Corps of Engineers has a big hand, a regulatory hand in some of these projects, and they're a challenge we've always had with them and in restoration projects that I've worked on is how they do their valuation. If they're gonna see a federal interest in a project and therefore be willing to try to seek federal funding to help a project, they're the way they monetize it is around flood risk. And basically, if we build this project, how much value of land, property, homes, businesses are we protecting?
Yeah.
Versus if we don't build this project, and it's a pretty simple monetary then system. Like, does the cost benefit of the protection outweigh the cost benefit of doing nothing and allowing this area just to get flooded? Yeah. And certainly in higher value areas, that cost benefit makes a whole lot more sense, as opposed to in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. It's hard to make those numbers work out sometimes. So there's definitely some inherent problems with the funding system when you're just looking at a dollar value of a house versus the ecosystem that might also benefit. And we've struggled for years trying to find ways to value the trees that are coming back and the birds that'll come back and the fish that'll come back. And Corps of Engineers, they don't really care about that, because we also couldn't put an actual monetary value to it. It's more of an intrinsic value that we've been trying to sell for decades of, but there's value in having this stuff. And I'm so excited about hearing the direction you're going in, and that hopefully the world is starting to go in, where we can use, I imagine, AI technology to help us with these complexities. Because as you pointed out, like, how do we put a monetary value to a coral reef or a wetland, to the fish and the birds? It's a difficult proposition to answer, but the brilliant speed that AI can help us figure out some of these complex issues is what I think I'm hearing you saying. That's the direction we're moving in, so that there can be a monetary value put to these things that we've historically just said there's an intrinsic value to, but now we can get into the economics of it, which will then drive people either willing to invest in it, or the insurance companies willing to support, or bonding, all the different financing tools that you talked about. They're looking for return, right? So if we can value these things, that gets us into markets that nature technically hasn't really been into before. So am I capturing that correctly? Yeah. Am I hearing that story correctly?
You set us up for at least another 30 minutes there. Right? No, there's a lot of, because you touched on a lot of core aspects of it. So let me try to go at them the way I just heard them from you. So,
sure.
So the first part is an inevitability, right? So for starters now, let's make this general, right? What you said is an uncomfortable truth, right? Like, where there's the most human leverage, there's the most leverage. That's the simple thing, right? That's where you get feedback. Now,
right.
the Army Corps of Engineers, right, and DARPA as well, right,
Yeah.
responsible for a lot of these developments. And I'm going to precursor all of this that's coming now was something I think we touched on. But as an architect, right, we have a very peculiar relationship with engineers. When you go through, university and architecture, there's this little those guys over there, guys with the colored pencils in the shirt pocket, right? And then the engineers make fun of the architects of the guys who can't put like a column over another.
Yeah.
And falls apart.
I've been the policy guy in the middle trying to help the architects and engineers come together.
Right. So let's go back to my roots and sort of building philosophy, art, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We have this great German word. No, don't know if we mentioned it last time. Baukunst, which is building art, right? Which means that the building and the art need to go hand in hand and enhance each other in order for something to be meaningful. Or we can have a whole session on this, the difference between form follows function follows form, and what really matters to people. But the truth is that what really matters to people, like the difference between a valuable real estate development and a non-valuable, is not how dry you sleep, right? So engineering alone does not make a difference for humans. It's the base, and really simple. When you mess up the engineering, everything else is meaningless. But the meaning is actually built on top of engineering, right?
Yeah.
So give you this funny little thing again, right? When you want to build a park as a community, you call a landscape architect to govern that intervention. When you want to restore your shoreline, the only person you can call is a coastal engineer. Coastal architecture doesn't exist, right? So that's something that's coming. Now, the unfortunate part, again, is we're going to start all of this stuff where there's high leverage. And this has sort of a thing that, many people don't like, which is, okay, we are, the big industrialized companies are responsible for the whole climate change thing. And now the other ones are going to spend the money to adapt. And so they'll be going to be okay, and everybody else is going to be screwed or that. Right. And so that's a reality we can't fully walk away from yet.
Social justice issues, environmental justice issues are real systemic issues that need to be addressed as well. But yeah, you're right. Yeah.
We're going to start in the places where an idealist would say that's not fair. You want to start with poor people and build their reefs back. But we're going to start where we're going to have the financial leverage to build these things. Right. Because there's a really important thing to map out here, which is the general thing we call the cost of technology. Right now, this stuff's still expensive, right? But the more we build of it, the less it's going to cost, right? And then the more we adapt technology, this other simple thing that's true is, like, when you're in the West, you're going to build things that have a high degree of automation that reduce manual labor, right? If you build them for, let's say, Madagascar, they're going to be built differently because whether we like it or not, manual labor is something else in Bangladesh or in low labor, low wage countries than it is in Florida, where a dive hour can cost you whatever $280 an hour, right? So the good thing is that scale will change the solutions, right? And invention and the first stuff's going to come where it might feel counterintuitive for somebody who wants
the resources to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also we're just embracing economic reality.
Right.
And I don't see anything wrong. I literally have, there's no shame here. I wish it were different, but that's the way the world is. Now, going back to intrinsic value. So that's this interesting thing when we say, we have rich oceans, we get rich culture and rich economies. Like, there's a part of us on the left that says, this thing, life is beautiful in and of itself. These ecosystems, the fish deserve to have personality rights, and we see the world in that kind of a souled way and everything. I'm one of those people, right? At the same time, they tend to be well off, highly educated, and we tend to be rather privileged. It's easy to be an idealist if you don't have to worry about baseline realities. And so, looking at as the ocean as a resource, we're moving on, like, making sure we see that as an equivalent value, and we get ourselves out of the ivory tower. And at the same time, everybody kind of feels an intrinsic value for life, right? Like, that's why we do get a lot of people to agree on the place that the fishermen as well, right? They'll like an ocean better when it's full of fish than when it's dead, not just because it gives them a better catch, but because it feels better. And it may give you this assurance that you're going to be able to pass something on to your kids. So we all feel intrinsic value. So it's not like it's meaningless. But no, I'm going to say and, not to be contrarian.
Yeah, I like that.
In the way that our world runs on an economic system, right? Like when it comes to paying up, when it comes to getting past, if the only thing you're bringing, or the more you're bringing emotions and intrinsic stuff, the more, and I'm not, this not always, we have philanthropy, all sorts of markets to do degree, but the more often you're going to run into the scenario that you're bringing a spoon to a gunfight because you're bringing emotions against dollars, right? And you've got to be really good and really lucky to make that work.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is that what means something to people, even if it's emotional, we know that's valuable, and we're getting better at tracking it, from health data to people care to, we now live in a world where attention is one of the most valuable currencies, right? Interesting, right? So what people care about does have a value that we're getting better and better at translating into our economic system. And we're also getting better at understanding how valuable ecosystems are. So if we just take let's make these sort of into image analogies. On one side, we're talking about the most expensive condos in the world, and they're threatened by flooding. And we're talking about a $14 billion economy that's built on having a lot of fish in the water, right? So that's one easy to understand.
Having a lot of freedom and privilege to go do that.
Yeah, so you move around on the other side of Florida, you've got all these wonderful ecosystems that are just there, and they're protected, and they're super valuable. Right? Like ecosystem restoration, Catskills in New York gives you clean water, right? These ecosystem services are not they're not just for the postcard, right? We're also, the more we come under pressure, the more we understand that this nature thing is really valuable in many, many different ways, right? And the more we're able to handle complexity, the more we're able to track data, the more we're able to put it together, the better we get at translating this, what you would call intrinsic value, into actual service value, right?
Right.
Sounds unromantic, is highly practical, right? So, and literally, I wasn't really aware of this discussion until some of the people we work with. No, we're doing protection things to protect wetlands behind it because the community knows how important the wetland is to create clean water for them at no cost, right? Like building machines to take that service would be $1 trillion investments. So there is that aspect exists as well, right? So, but it's easier when it's sort of in the poignant, let's say, extreme examples. It's easy to see how these things work. And because the other one we just talked about, it's really easy to say, hey, build a reef, change the wave energy, add some seagrasses, change the wave energy, add some mangroves, all of a sudden, 98% of your flood damage is gone. Very different insurance scenario. We'll have to change the postcard of what it means to have like a beach view, because all of a sudden you're going to have mangroves there again, right? That's a cultural thing we'll have to work on.
Yeah.
But without it, we're not going to be able to insure your houses. So that's probably what's going to happen, right? Good news is if you pair those three ecosystems, you also get a ton of life. So all of a sudden, wow, fisheries are back. So like that quick example is something where we're going from intrinsic, right? I still see it. I love the visual of it. Here's a coral reef, and being able to put the coral reef in, just like nature allows us to create a low energy zone behind it, because that's what happened over, and that's where seagrasses thrive. If you then put some mangroves or a wetland in, you've got a two-way filter between the land and the sea, because from the land you have runoff that kills the coral reefs. In the flood, it's the opposite. You got damage. Great, So wow, we can build stuff that provides these services.
Yeah.
But right now, yep. Sorry, go ahead.
No,
please. I talk. Go. No, right. And maybe just to put this marker here, that like we're moving into a time where this is now possible, right? Where we're going to be able to design and build and model these kind of interventions on infrastructure scale, right? We're working on this now. This is not sort of pipe dreams. We're building these things, and you touched on it. Well, maybe you go first before we go into quantum and AI and how these things bite in there. And I'm happy to talk about 3D printing and those other things as well. And like just the fun part of technology. Well, we can go into some examples, and then I think it won't be that hard to understand how these things are seeable.
Yeah. Well, let me just kind of put a bow maybe on this conversation, then we can transition into again some more of the what between the AI and the 3D printing. But what I hear you describing, at least how I'm interpreting it, is truly this a real definition of the triple bottom line about sustainability. It's people, planet, and profit, and it's these circles of influence. What's important for people, what's important for the planet, and the profit component, which I would venture to say some on the romantic left side of the spectrum sometimes forgets about that profit circle. What you're really describing is what we're trying to accomplish in sustainability, is bringing those three circles closer together, so that Venn diagram of what are we actually trying to accomplish is where people, planet, and profit all overlap. And it's exciting to hear that those circles are starting to overlap more, and we're having more opportunity. It's not the planet versus the profit. Like we're starting to overlap these areas, and again, therefore, you can talk to the fishermen that might be right leaning to talk about the profit of their, the people that they take out fishing, and that's their business, and they don't, they want to make sure the fish are there for their profit, or the scuba diver that wants to go out because they just want to enjoy it, the intrinsic beauty of it, or the developer that, or the city manager that wants to protect the coastline for their community. I mean, all of these things are starting to overlap in very real ways, as opposed to just, on a Venn diagram on a piece of paper. So that's what's exciting to me in this conversation, is that it's not just a vision of sustainability. It's we're actually doing it. It's capable. So we can do more of it.
Exactly, like wave the insurance guy around again, right? Because that's sort of one thing everybody can relate to in our current news climate, right? And again, that guy and Las Vegas, they have the best data. They have better data than all of our scientists combined on that specific kind of element. Like, what does risk exposure mean? Like, what can be done with certain kind of interventions?
Bring them to the discussion, exactly.
So let me give you just a realistic timeline, right? If you can say, hey, if we can be at a place where we can calculate these things properly, right? Where it's like, okay, what's the flood damage with a reef? What's the flood damage with a reef with seagrasses and mangroves? And what's the flood damage without it, right? All of a sudden, these kind of things very quickly become clear investment cases, right? The other aspect you want to get to, I don't want to omit this at all. I think it's a really important point, and we touched on it just a second ago, is so in real estate, again, go back to napkin mathematics, right? Yeah. What does it cost me to build a square foot? What's the square foot going to get me? Everything else is important, but it kind of follows after that, and it's mechanics. Securing, permissions, plots, like all sorts of everything. All the complications come after we figured all those things out, but that's what it starts with, right? So number one is figuring out how to quantify better, specify, and create the economic impacts outcomes from a certain intervention, right? Flood modeling, fishery increase, hotel sales, boat trips, nights sold, people happy, jobbers with better health, whatever it is that we can find, right, that we can relate into a value stream. This is all output related, right? The other thing that needs a boatload of work is how much does it cost to build, right?
Yeah.
And, right, so we're not there yet by a long shot where you could look at these kind of things from a professional lens and say, we're efficient, right? We're not. And so, again, with no discredit, a lot of this has to do with the fact that much of this whole field of economy has been run by nonprofits, administrators, scientists, volunteers, who are great people with great hearts, but they're not builders, developers, or they don't, it's literally a world that doesn't run under the system we talked before, where the value proposition has to be right. The project pitch to the client has to sit, and you have to deliver with loads of accountability and take on that kind of entrepreneurial risk as well, right? So, all of that said, right, we're not there, and it's going to take a while. But we know, like, if we just extrapolate everything else in technology, if you look at how this stuff, what it costs now, already seems to work when you look at the mechanics of financing. Just because in Miami-Dade and those three adjacent countries, the numbers are astronomical, right? It's like 300 million a year in damages or something, right? And so if you take 300 million a year, even if you took it as a building budget, right, you can build a lot of reef and coastal resilience infrastructure with that.
Right.
Now, so where we think that there's a real interesting role for many of the funds we've been using so far is to bridge that gap where in certain cases now the economics might not work yet because of the simple fact that, well, on both scales, we're not good enough yet at mapping the value streams, and our technology is at the moment still in its infancy in terms of where it can be in efficiency compared to what you can do on land right now. Right. At the same time, everybody's seen the videos of robots putting drywall together. Like, we know where automation and robotics is going to take us and our ability to build. It's going to speed things up a lot. And we'll have very, very similar things in our ability to plant seagrass beds. And, what we're working on a lot is we're going into a new age of what coral restoration means, right? So we know the live part is going to be very difficult, but I'm just going to say, coral reef building. I'm not going to call it coral restoration, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're working on with 3D printing, being able to plan reefscapes on infrastructure level, look at them like urban development projects, make sure they're designed properly for all the fish you want to be there, build it, drop it in the water, put the fish in. That sounds a little weird because right now we're using metal grids. We're looking at sort of using old structures to repopulate them with live coral, and it's very difficult, right? What we work on a lot is building these things.
Yeah.
It's really fun, right? 3D puzzle pieces that'll weigh 200 tons and they'll come in containers and be assemblable, right? Those kind of things that's
awesome.
That's a reality, right? We work on this every day. That's coming, and this is coming in the next. You're probably going to see the first live project in the next couple of months of that kind of stuff, and that at least changes one timeline, which is right now we're putting coral holding elements on old dying reefs, and then we say within a couple of years it'll be back, right? And sort of that timeline is right now in years and decades. And again, somebody coming from architecture, the big city, in a private sector, that doesn't sound good enough. So we'll be able to change that, where you can go from a sandy bottom to here's a whole reef city that we designed. And there's another interesting aspect of it. If we take sort of this climate change, temperature warming scenario seriously, we know that what was in one place now over thousands of years is going to have to move.
It's going to migrate. It's going to be somewhere else, right?
Yeah. So we're looking literally at we could go from the technology we have now, not in efficiency, not quickly, but from the stuff we have on the table now. Well, this could be next year we can do this, where we can go and see which reef patches here, which figurations work really well for you. We can LiDAR scan them, run them through programming, cut them into pieces, and build them literally one-to-one somewhere else within a couple of months, right? And that scales again. This is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, but it's not crazy trillion stuff. And it doesn't mean it's full of life yet. We're still going to have to figure out how to grow corals that will survive, but we can optimize it for attaching them. We can build cavities in there for certain kind of life forms. We can drop the fish in the moment you drop the reef in, right? So those things are possible now, right? And that's sort of the tech part. I think the real building, the engineering. I work on this every day, right? I'm so excited. And we work on what does it look like to have a nail gun to shoot little plastic seedlets into the seafloor to get seagrass restoration going. That is sort of molded in plastic made out of seaweed. So this stuff, again, it's going to take time to get it done right. It's going to certainly take time to make it economically feasible, but those things are not far away. And maybe that's the one really big relation. We all see how fast our capacities are changing, right? We all see how much ChatGPT can do in your regular lives once you start using it properly, right? We see, there's concerts where Michael Jackson's hologram is dancing on stage. So the general power of image creation, design creation, handling of complexity, and we'll throw these in one pot, AI and quantum. So quantum just basically really changes the ability to do complexity, right? You can now look at an infinite number of possibilities at the same time. Now that sounds really big and gooey, but for simple things like form finding of a reef, for example, it's now feasible to go okay, we'll scan a whole reef segment and we'll go to the next one, say, these are the outcomes we create. And then AI assisted design form finding can get you somewhere in minutes. We're oh, wow, here's something that, would have taken us ages to manually design. And the next part out of it, specifically in ecosystem services, is relevant. It's going to take us a long time to be able to say, what does a reef have to look like in order to create the most fish production? That's going to take a bit. But in terms of wave modeling, right? That's nothing else but sort of, fluid dynamics calculations on a really high complex level. And they're doing stuff that's like, I don't get it, but basically they're modeling grains of sand and particles of water. So same thing, economic feasibility aside, because this stuff all costs a ton of money on compute as well.
Yeah.
But we know how quickly that cost curve goes down over time. We're looking at a world in that's not far away where it's completely feasible to say, okay, here's this coast we need to protect against the flooding changes. Here's the prognosis what that flooding change is going to do over the next 20 years. And now here's the optimal intervention for the budget you have available to get you the most flood protection possible. And in that shape, probably the best kind of thing we can do to get you your fish back, right? And now that gets us a lot closer to real estate, because if I can take that to a client and the client is the county and whoever else, we're looking at a financial discussion that is very different from what we're doing now. And it creates a much bigger framework of saying, here's what we deliver it how, and it's going to give us enough fidelity to say, we'll absorb some of the risk, we'll deliver this with the price we tell you it's going to cost now. Right. And that all of these processes are just examples of how we professionalize this kind of approach to get closer to how the traditional world of real estate and this kind of stuff works.
Yeah.
And now we can layer on all the good stuff, right? As we get there, we're going to have to bridge a lot of gaps. The first projects are going to be hard to make economically feasible, right? That's a great place for philanthropy, for example, to kick in and come in and say, hey, we're going to co-anchor some mixed funding for the beginning, right? Because you don't want venture capital too much in this kind of stuff to not corrupt it. Like, those are some great bridges to gap. And, we need to create sort of financial bonding structures to say, like, if this is built, we'll mitigate some of the risks. We'll figure out how to do maintenance contracts. And we'll say, yeah, if this is built, we will lower the insurance rates, which means you can finance the process there.
Right. You're getting a financing tool, bonding, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of the tools we're using now that we can use to bridge the gap to when we're more efficient and financially viable on our own feet. But again, to repeat myself, with full confidence on the stuff we're working on, that world is not far away.
That's so exciting. And you just described, in a way, it's the world that I live in right now with riverine, flood mitigation, restoration projects. How we fund those is really more on the hard dollar side of showing what kind of benefit you're going to get from protecting a community from flood mitigation, right? So protecting our coastlines from the rising seas that are predicted to come, and the bigger storms that are going to be more damaging, using that same model, and then the same thing that we try to do here in the Pacific Northwest, right? We're building a flood mitigation project. We're going to try to restore some of the salmon habitat. So and then we can then go to the voters and community taxpayers and say, this is the benefit you're going to get for funding this and paying this, and to be able to do that at scale for our coastlines around the world is so exciting, because the mechanisms are there now that you're putting all the financial pieces together and showing these benefits. And then again, for the folks who just want there to be fish and coral reefs and mangrove trees, great, they get what they want. For the insurance agents and for the developers and the folks that are looking at it more economically, they get what they want. And bringing people together to support these projects, as opposed to the way we've kind of done it, where one side is right and the other side is wrong, and we have to fight over it. Like, no, we're all trying to get to the same place. I love that about your message, that you're really trying to not demonize one side or the other. Like, everybody wants the same thing, just maybe for a slightly different reason. So let's all work together and get there. And I'm excited about the fact you're getting it done. Yeah.
I have a whole other chapter now for you. And I'll go back to the Army, the Corps of Engineering, right? So, I'm really glad we came into this from the economical side, right? Which is based on function and engineering and calculation, right? And let's say, back to building art, right? Sort of the art is built on the function. If you can't get the engineering right, if you can't get the numbers right, the project's a failure, no matter what your artistic.
Right.
We have some acceptances. It's not always unfortunately, that's not always true, but so that's the school I come from. And I think that's what the world runs on.
Generally, yeah.
The great thing is the art is valuable too.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
These places are not just about engineering.
Right.
And so there's other stuff that I talk about all the time here with our team, and that we're building these tools from. And that's one of those things I mentioned earlier is like in real estate, we know all this, where you visualize the future, right? Before a building is sold, you sell the apartments on visuals, right? And those visuals are not about how dry you're going to sleep. They're going to be about how that thing, it's going to feel to be there.
Yeah.
That's what you sell real estate.
The space you're going to be living in, right?
And so the cool thing is about many of these coasts, we talk about fishery economics, we talk about coastal protection. What they actually are places people care about a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And so what they care about a lot as well is how they're going to feel. And in a similar way, it's how they're going to look. Right. And so we have this, line we often talk about when you look at the engineering solutions, like I'm not going to mention any of these products because I don't want to get in trouble. But a lot of the famous projects are like these, reef protection. I'm just going to call them whatever organisms that are designed by, aptly, you could say, the Army Corps of Engineers, because they just care about the function, right?
Right.
How do I say this without being... All right, I'm going to just be really frank here. I'm not talking about anything specific. Hopefully nobody feels mentioned here. But they'll look like shit. That's the simple. They'll look like shit. They shit. Right? And so, sorry for the frank language here. But
it's okay.
So in that, as an architect, you can't sell something that looks like shit. You just can't, right? It's like, no, thanks, I'm moving on to the next one. And you shouldn't, because it doesn't matter. So, people like places like, beautiful special places deserve beautiful designs. Let's make it that, frankly. And that's not just a romantic thing. That's a financial reality, right?
Absolutely. Right.
Going back to this, the way you sell the most expensive apartment in the history of a city is not, it's by how that building looks and feels and how special it is. And you sell that on a piece of paper, on a virtual model, right? And so we can do some of that. The first thing is we need to design these things so that they're beautiful, right? And we can do that now because we can 3D print organic shapes. And I don't mean the layer cake stuff. I mean like the real things that look like the kind of, that are close to, that can get close to what you would expect. And we need to, want to look at these projects, coastal projects, from a, like a landscape architect and not like a coastal engineer. It's not about sections that show you where things are. It's about what is this place going to look and feel like. You want to design it from a human perspective because, people care about the places because it gives them great experiences. So we have to design them so they deliver great experiences after whatever our intervention is, and hopefully a better experience than before. But that's also something people can care about, right? So
Absolutely.
If we can create a beautiful virtual project and say, hey, community, this is what you can do, you can use that to do all sorts of fun things, right? The way you build them. So the one interesting difference maybe is in architecture, we used to do this in a static way, right? You build a model, you do like a photo, like a photo shoot. And in nature, that doesn't really work because the simple before and after doesn't really give you the sensation that you know what you're looking at. Different in real estate, because if you see a building, everybody kind of knows, oh, that's fancy, right? I don't need to see it move.
Right.
Even though that they're, the modern real estate people, they do that as well. They shoot little videos where there's a virtual plant moving in the wind so you can feel more, right?
Right.
But in nature, we need to visualize that magical process of how life comes back. So you kind of know, and you need to see a bird fly through the thing, right? A bird sitting on a tree is not the same as sort of the feeling that we get in nature.
Right.
But once you do that, visualizing a future state like that, we can use that for a community to, for example, fundraise, right? If you can get people on board and actually sell the vision and make it beautiful, you don't only have to talk about benefits. You can actually say, we can do this if we can raise the funds for it.
Right.
You'll give the community something to do that with. And, right, we're going to sort of a next generation of technology toys that I think are really, really important. Let's not just call them tools, not toys. It almost sounds derogatory. We worked on those first, and I'm really happy we're in construction now because that's the way it should be. We should be able to say, here's the project, and then here's the enhancement technology. But, once you have something in a virtual space and you visualize it over time, we're literally talking about the Unreal Engine here, right? That's where, the big difference between my old work is I used to design something in mostly static, and now we're building it in a world that like Unreal, where you can feel the weather and you can see something grow, right? So you can see an intervention happen in a coral reef, and you can see the corals grow, and the fish come back, and the stingray swim, and the seagrass is coming in, right? So you can kind of get that magic. But once we have a virtual project, if it's in a real place, you can start breaking that down like a game into little hexagons and allow people to claim a part of it and contribute. Or you can say somebody can buy some extra fish that will get dropped in once the thing is placed. Like we can start creating virtual experiences that will allow you to create funding not only on a benefit argument, but on the experience, on the art, on the human piece.
Well, I'm envisioning that's also
something super exciting for us. I mean, that's also that's why we like it. I mean, as an architect, that's what you want. I want to see. I want to see the art. I want to see like the magic for people.
Yeah.
But back to intrinsic value, that's something that I have real faith in will be, maybe not equally powerful in terms of fundraising when you're talking about, Florida state coastal protection, hundreds of millions. Like that's always going to be the first ticket. But I think that has a real place to play, especially on smaller leverage communities where you can say, okay, well, we don't have enough institutional funding, but let's make a really beautiful project and try to get our community to rally around it, to fundraise it by giving them electronic tools to do that. We know that too. Imagine let's just imagine you have a game like a Kickstarter campaign that's based on a real world intervention, a reef and segments and fish where you can just sort of, hey, dedicate your birthday, fundraise for the next batch of fish, or, we need this and this much as a community. You can see that coming together really quickly.
Yeah. Well, and I'm being a public policy guy. I love the idea of the private fundraising that you're talking about where, an individual can, go on their Facebook account and say, donate for my birthday to this cause or whatever the case may be. But what you're also describing, the virtual tool that can show, the future product, that can also be used for getting people to vote on a bond or to, for elected officials to, have the support that they need to, raise their property tax half a cent to pay off a bond or raise the capital to build something. So it's, I see the policy tool.
I'm gonna write that down because that's a really interesting factor I haven't even looked at yet.
Yeah,
I'll give you two more aspects. We've talked about almost years of stuff we're going through here.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about fundraising, right? So I'll go back to my old life. So before I met my wife, I had this great partner, Sebastian, who's now one of the most successful traditional architects, young architects in the world. Probably, certainly, where he's kind of got like the moment I left, he went on the ideal trajectory for our old business. No, it's kind of funny here. But it was just, so his background was in theater. He's an architect, but he had this his school, he won prizes for theater stuff. And so it was just such a great experience to, in terms of how you sell projects, right? So we work great together, but projects would always start with him finding some great reference image. Made some sort of reference, and then I could create the most stringent and beautiful floor plans and designs. The numbers could work perfectly. It could be the perfect project in every one of its sort of ding 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 kind of things. Didn't matter. The only thing that matters is the moment the visual goes up and this awesome theater picture of, and that's the cool thing when I learned. It's not about what it's going to look like; it's what it's going to feel like.
What's going to feel like? It's the emotion, right?
That's what gets you the sale, right?
Absolutely.
And then I would always just smile because whatever I could, and then, all the stuff afterwards kind of justifies, oh, it's a great floor plan, Fritz, right. All perfect, right? The thing that, you see at the split seconds, the client is like, whoa, that's it. We're good. The rest is just going through motions. And so, turn that around, right? It's super hard to sell an environmental project off of engineering plans, calculations, because you won't catch any emotions.
Yeah.
Right? And so the moment, that's why literally we're visualizing videos of what does it feel like when the stuff comes back and the corals grows, so you can get that magic across in terms of what is this going to feel like?
Yeah.
So that you can get people excited behind it. That's one aspect. And I'll add the other one that's so important when you talk about not even just on an individual basis, sort of there's two really great little word exercises. And I don't know, everybody that knows me has been bored to smithereens by having heard this so many times. No. But if you have kids, you know this, right? There's no bigger difference in language, thinking, human life than you can do with one simple letter. Whereas if you go from a reef or like a child to my child, there's
Yeah.
no bigger difference between a child and my child, right? And I think that works for these things just as well. There's
Yeah.
a huge difference between a reef that our county is being paying, and my reef,
My reef. Yeah.
our
Where I have
reef
some
that
ownership
we
in it.
participated. We crowdfunded it. We
Yeah.
got excited about why it was being built. We were
Yeah.
there when the elements of our reef came in the containers and they got assembled on our dock, and then they got poured together and the whole thing got lifted and we got to attach our corals and it would drop in the water, and all of a sudden it's there. We dropped our fish, right? That's our reef now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it didn't just come, it wasn't just there. We funded it, we built it, we felt the experience. Like, that's a different relationship for a community with their asset.
Yeah.
Going forward, not just talking about all the fun and the opportunities you'll have in terms of like making it an engaging thing and being able to crowdfund and fundraise for it, right? My favorite analogy for all of this is, you Americans are so good with this, like barn raising, right? What happens when a community comes together? Look, I literally have barn raising images in these decks when we communicate this kind of stuff, what that technology wants to deliver. It's that, like, what's a reef raising if we give you the technology to get people excited about it?
Yeah.
And so we work on that, we work on it. We built this stuff out of our own thinking that that's what's necessary. That was my biggest belief as an architect. We can't sell these projects without giving people access to the emotions. Because of what I mentioned earlier, it's the gap, right? When I say coral reef restoration, I see this stuff on my inner eye, but you don't. And most others in the room don't.
Right.
So we can't get this across. We literally can't sell it, not in a functional way, but in a soulful way. I can't get you there so you can want it, right? And so, like, we worked on those visualizations, and they work the moments we've been in there. And now we literally work with organizations to do that so that they can get their projects across to the community. And there's a little side thing that is important about it. If you visualize it properly, right, it can't look like shit, because then the community will tell you, like, hey, it'll look worse than before. What do you mean? We're going to spend 10 million and you're going to ruin my place, right? Because a lot of these engineering projects have that inherent problem.
Yeah.
Because they're built with engineering stuff and they kind of get moved along, and then it's done and everybody's like, okay, it might protect our shoreline, but my beach is dead, right? And so it has this funny little side benefit that if you actually visualize it, you can't sell crap anymore. But yeah, I'm happy now because we got into a lot of the specifics of technology and why I think it's important and what it can deliver. And I think this is the answer to your question with the intrinsic value. We know a lot of these mechanisms. We know they work on land. We know they work in other industries, right? And the fact that people care matters immensely. Oh, yeah, great. So I brought in Sebastian Treese, Treese.e, by the way, if you want. His wife's teaching at Yale now, so this is like legit stuff. They sold the most, as I understand, the most expensive apartment in the history of Berlin for like $26 million, which can't impress anybody in New York, but for Berlin back then it was a big ticket. And it's because of that, because those images are magic, right? And then he works with a developer where people know what's on the image is actually going to end up on land. And boom, there you go. Sold off a piece of paper, right? And it's because you get the magic across and you can believe in the fact that what's on the image is going to be delivered. People will put their money down for that.
Yeah.
And it's not because of the square footage and because the elevator works well. Right. It's because of the magic.
Yeah, it's the emotional connection to it.
Yeah, that's a value. It's a value that is immensely powerful.
Absolutely.
Economy. If you can get it harnessed and communicated and get leverage on it, you can get cash for it.
Absolutely.
And build it.
Well, Fritz, we've could keep talking to you all day because I just so
tired. I talk too much. I'm so sorry.
No. So
it's not a free flowing conversation. It's a monologue.
No, it's been great. You've given a lot of great information that I've asked for and I've appreciated, and I'm sure the audience does too. Is there, in just a couple minutes, is there anything that's super important that we haven't touched on? I think we talked offline about you're relaunching the website for Oceans 2050. Is there any information that's coming that you want people to know about that we haven't talked about, or how they can support you with all of this?
Well, I mean, supporting, I think we'll get to a point where the work will drive itself, which is the good part.
Yeah.
But we do, of course, we have a foundation, and like I said, so there's a lot of bridges to gap, a lot of technology to build that can A, get us ahead, and B, serve common good. So we're happy about any contribution of any kind, and partnerships are good. Like if you're a hotel, let's talk. If you have beachfront property, let's talk. If there's something there, always interested in any of that. Yeah. So we're literally now in the process of forming like Oceans 2050 Studio, sort of as the place that does sort of the complementary work to the nonprofit as a business, right?
As a business,
So
right?
yeah, it's sort of like let's call it. That's not going to be the official thing, but back to the reference of coastal engineering, like what does coastal architecture look like, and how does it work with real estate development and in those kind of logics, and just a tinker shop for all the different technology, right? Because a couple of things we didn't touch on, how AI can, count fish and start tracking your reef health and your fishery abundance, like those kind of things,
Yeah.
those are really gnarly. But they're not shocking. I mean, I think people have seen this kind of stuff, right? Like you can run Lego bricks through a camera, and then they'll tell you how many 20,000 different things you can build within the next 4 years. So we know AI is capable of these kind of tracking technologies, and that's going to be important again for something like fishery abundance, to translate that into metrics, like which fish are where, when, and how, when you do what, right? Those are the keys for getting to confidence in these predictions for what your return on investment is. And then, yeah, there's something concrete. It looks like our Blue Cities Alliance is launching next week, so we're going to do some interesting stuff in Athens. We'll see how that goes. Fingers crossed. But there's an interesting, I wanted to mention that I wrote it down earlier when you were talking about on those both sides, right? So
Yeah.
just as a simple representation of many of the things we're talking about, like the first phase of this Blue Cities Alliance is going to be sort of the program for the city. The second phase is then the Blue Cities Alliance, so how do many cities globally, form a community that benefits everyone. But when you start at the portfolio of a single city, like the way we're designing these first days now is to cover that spectrum, right? So you kind of start with the stuff that gets a city excited, which is events and movie showings at the beach and sports and culture and art and cooking, right? All these things that are culturally relevant that we feel they go back to your intrinsic value package.
Yeah,
They're kind of
absolutely.
tough.
Yeah.
But on the same day, we're going to sit down with the insurance people and sort of the threat collectors that are good at turning those kind of things into dollars,
Right.
because while we do all the beautiful connecting heart stuff, we want to help cities understand the values in economic terms of their blue natural capital,
both values,
and how to
right.
develop the mechanisms to finance it. So that principle sort of can get translated into many different aspects of this kind of work, and I think it's going to be where a lot of the fun stuff's going to happen in the midterm.
Gonna have to have you back on the show then in 6 months or so to talk about the studio and how the Blue Cities Alliance, because it sounds like you got more to share, and maybe a few months we can get you back on to see how these things are progressing.
Well, hopefully a few months. You never know, right? And it's not like the world's going in a linear fashion at the moment.
Right.
So
Right.
Take it day by day.
Well, let me kind of wrap us up here. And last time, we ended the show talking about hope, and we did that last time. So I'm going to ask you just one new question this time, not about hope, but something tangential, still important to me anyway. I think it's a human superpower that we have, and it's gratitude. So it's just a simple question. What are you grateful for these days?
It's so funny you ask this. So I'm gonna make this a little long-winded because I guess it's funny.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm German, right? So we're kind of dry and we get uncomfortable when we talk about what are you grateful for, don't do feelings. But I've had so much great process on that front, and literally the last week, I don't know why it sort of just popped up. But who knows? Maybe it's because things are a little turbulent at the moment, and some of these aspects are really frightening. And then I don't know, whatever it is. Sometimes when shit around you happens, it's bad. You kind of realize how good you have it, right?
Yeah.
So I've been talking about this all the time. The last weeks, I've been telling my wife how grateful I am to have her. I've been telling my kids all the time how great it is to have them, and despite all their shitteries, how great. How marvelous little people they are to have around. I've been telling the people I work with, like, Matt, my principal partner, and all, like, a couple of the other brilliant guys that I get to work with every week and every day, how grateful I am for that. Because it's just like, yeah, let's go back. I mean, this is a big thing. And then, just copying a lot of things you hear. But one of the best things you get to do is when you get to wake up and you want to get to work.
Yeah.
Right. And when your decision in the morning is like, how much time am I going to spend with my work and how much time am I going to spend with my people? Not because the work has to get done, because I just want to do it.
I just enjoy doing it. Yeah.
That's so good. And then the other thing that I never had before is I've got so many things on my calendar during the week. I'm like, oh, great, call with these guys. Right. And this is strange in this, again, this strange time where there's a lot to be concerned about. We talked about history, Germans, and like where we're going. And man, is there a lot on like a global perspective that one can get concerned about at the moment. And
yeah,
there are lots of sort of uncertainties and threats out. And there's a lot of, heartbreaking stuff going on around, much more than there used to be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's something I saw on LinkedIn yesterday about what your life looked like if you were born in Europe in like 1898, like what you went through by the time you were 6 years, I think, or even in the US. Like, So, we have it rather well from that perspective. So, as long as you wake up healthy in the morning and you've got your loved ones around, I think you want to be good in general. But the more you get to sort of sorting out spending time privately or at work with people you don't want to hang out with, and the more you get to work with people and talk with people you just like being with, man, can you be grateful for stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I'll finish with the fun one. Last year, sort of, France hosted the Olympics, right? And so the 10-year, 12-year program, that's why they're so broke now and in debt, because they spend so much money for the Olympics, which is, but one of the things they did is all the villages got to choose if they're a flower village or a sports village, especially around here. So, and we're kind of the smallest scale of the ones that got something from the pot. So we were the last ones.
Yeah.
And literally, like, our village decided to be a sports village. The other ones are, flower villages are super cute. You drive through and then they, the French love their roundabouts and everything's full of flowers. It's gorgeous. But the sports villages get these like, we're a tiny place here. We're outside of a city. We're a tiny place. Yeah. And we have this completely disproportionate sports facility that just got finished, like, in, I don't know when. It was right before, like, we were literally the last ones. 2 weeks before the Olympics, they finally put the basketball court up. But it's gorgeous. I've got this half court, beautiful colors, beautiful backboard, perfect rim. They change the nets whenever they break. It's next to a sheep pasture. Right, so I literally get to get booed by the sheep when I go out there. But 4 minutes away from me, I've got what looks like sort of a AI-generated, what's the greatest peaceful basketball court you can make, and I get to go. When I get order and discipline, I can go out there and put up my shots in the morning and at night, and this place that is just. I text all the people that I know that care about basketball, like, look where I am again. So
that's definitely
you can find
something to be grateful for.
Yeah, you can find a lot of great stuff. And like, again, the more you can fix your inner attitude for appreciating the stuff you have, and the more you can filter out those things where, like, don't spend time with people that suck your energy out and make you angry, or just even better if you don't get angry. But the more you get to practice it without having to sit and write a journal about it, because I'm still uncomfortable about doing that stuff.
Yeah, well, that's why gratitude for me is a superpower. I mean, you get grateful for the things you have, your whole outlook on life starts to get a little bit better, even during the hard times, which we're in and we're going to be in and come and go, because hard times, that's what hard times do. They come and go. But if you can find that gratitude for life, you can walk through those hard times with a bit of grace. Well, Fritz, thank you so much. And I will follow up with you, because I do want to have you back on the show at some point to hear about the studio once that gets up and running, and learn more about the Blue Cities Alliance when that gets up and going. I think you said in Athens is the first city.
Again, these days I don't know until things are done. I'm not going to. But we'll figure out we'll see what happens.
Yeah, when the appropriate time is, I'd love to have you back on and talk about those things, because it's super fascinating, the work that you're doing, and I think it's incredibly important. work that you are doing. So thank you very much for your daily efforts to make the world a better place. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really,
That's
again,
true.
I'm grateful for what I get to do. It's
Yeah.
been a funky ride with ups and downs, but right now it's sort of it's this. I know this sounds weird, but and in this time, but it's really exciting at the moment.
There's a lot of opportunity. Yeah.
Talking to Matt about, we both like, this is the most fun and rewarding thing I've ever done. Right? There are so many unexpected things coming together.
Yeah.
And maybe that is important in this time, right? That there's so much scary stuff that you really want to, find the things that might turn out really well. In this sort of the things that coming with this crazy new breakneck speed, the changes that will be imminent. I'm one of the lucky ones who gets to sit on something where what's coming is going to unlock all sorts of crazy cool things and break down barriers. So the more we can find those, the less, the better it will look, I guess.
Yeah.
And at the moment, you just look, I take everything day by day at the moment.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it, actually. That's I do the same.
Happy to come back on. I hope things manifest the way they look at the moment, and then I'm going to be happy to report. Thank you for your patience and dear, taking in all these monologues here. And man, did we cover a lot of ground. So.
We got a lot covered today. I appreciate you coming back on the show, and again, look forward to seeing you at some point and staying in touch with you in the meantime. So all the best to you and everything you're trying to get done.
You too. Take care.
All
Thanks.
Right. Bye. What a great conversation. I really enjoy speaking with Fritz, and I'm grateful he came back on the show today. In today's conversation, we went well beyond vision and real deep into action, exploring how reef restoration can be modeled like urban design, how AI and quantum computing are revolutionizing conservation, and how blue natural capital is redefining the economics of sustainability. Fritz showed us that we don't have to choose between protecting the planet and strengthening local economies. We can do both, and we can do it now. Now, before I get into my suggested calls to action, I want to share a little small world moment I had with Fritz before we hit record for today's episode. After our first conversation a couple of months ago, I realized I'd actually met his wife and Oceans 2050 co-founder, Alexandria Cousteau. I met her more than a decade ago. It was at the 2012 River Rally Conference in Portland, Oregon, where I was presenting on lessons learned from an ecosystem restoration project I was working on, and Alexandra was there to be one of the evening keynote speakers at the conference. I even dug up this old photo of us chatting after her talk. So it's been a real kind of full circle moment for me to now connect with Fritz and share all of this story with you as well. So, and speaking of updates, during our interview, Fritz mentioned that Athens was on track to become the first city to sign the Blue Cities Manifesto. I'm thrilled to share that since we recorded that episode, that historic milestone has now happened. On July 9th, Athens officially joined the Global Blue Cities Alliance, becoming the first municipality to commit to restoring ocean health and integrating marine ecosystem protection into its urban planning. It's an inspiring example of what leadership looks like in the face of climate and ecological challenges. I want to offer my congratulations to Fritz, Alexandra, the Oceans 2050 team, and to the city of Athens for their forward-thinking efforts related to ocean restoration. Getting that first is always the most difficult. Now that Athens has signed on to the Blue Cities Alliance, I'm hopeful other cities will quickly follow. And another part of this episode that really stuck with me was our discussion about AI. I've always been fascinated by technology, but hearing how AI is being used to model complex ecosystems, optimize reef design, and even track the return of life after restoration, well, all that's really mind-blowing to me. I'm actively seeking future guests who can dive deeper into how AI is being used to advance sustainability. So stay tuned. I look to bringing some of those guests on as quickly as I can. And of course, with every new technology comes concerns. AI, for example, has the concern of its energy consumption. So we'll have to explore those things too. So stay tuned. I hope to bring that information to you in the near future. Now, if you're feeling inspired after today's conversation, I hope you'll take some action. Now, whether that means supporting ocean restoration efforts, volunteering at a local habitat project, reducing your plastic use, advocating for policy change, or simply starting a conversation in your community, please know that every action matters and your voice matters. So please get out there and get active and help make the world a better place. And if you'd like to support this show, please visit the support page at storiessustainus.com. You can like, share, and subscribe to the podcast and our social media channels. Leave a comment or review, or if you're able and so inclined, you can make a financial contribution to help offset the costs of producing this weekly program. Every bit of support, financial or otherwise, is welcomed and deeply appreciated. You're helping me reach more people, share more stories, and inspire more action. So thank you for all the support. And finally, I'd love to invite you back for the next episode coming out on July 29th. I'll be speaking with a freelance writer who has more than 35 years of experience using the power of storytelling to advance the work of nonprofits and shed light on urgent social justice issues, including everything from sex trafficking and black market adoption to bullying, child abuse, and homelessness. It's really a heartfelt conversation about the power of a good story to move people into action. So please catch the next episode of Stories Sustain Us on July 29th at storiessustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And as always, thank you for being here today. Keep making the world a better place. Until next time, I'm Steven Schauer. Take care of yourself and each other. Take care.